The United States Department of Agriculture has issued a new warning about the bird flu. The virus was found in 3 ducks in the Carolinas earlier this month. The cases are reportedly the first that we've seen in the U.S. in 5 years. Although not considered a high risk to humans, the illness can quickly affect bird populations. The USDA says that those handling birds should wear gloves and work in the open air to help contain spread.
Bill, how confident are you that we as a global community will deal with the next pandemic better?
Well, there were a lot of people in 2015 after the Ebola epidemic who were talking about what needed to be done. And in this pandemic, the countries that had some exposure to SARS-CoV-1 were amongst the outliers. So Australia is a true outlier. They orchestrated diagnostics, they executed quarantine policies, and they have a death rate in a different league than the other rich countries. I mean, just utterly different. And everybody had the capability to do that. They, have less PCR machines than other rich countries. It wasn't something, they had more travelers coming in from China than other countries. So hopefully, given so many negative things, not just the millions of deaths and the economic toll, but the lack of schooling, depression, overdose deaths. I mean, it's hard to make the entire list. As you say, for men, more men died. For women, more women had unacceptable burdens thrust onto them. So the cost of being ready for the next pandemic is not super large. It's not like climate change where, 10 trillion, 20 trillion, these are big numbers. Global surveillance capability would cost like $1 billion a year. The R&D that we need to do to get magic vaccines and diagnostics and therapeutics, that's less than 100 billion over the next decade. So, if we're rational, yes, the next time we'll catch it early, and it won't go global like it did this time.
Now, the reason we are here today in this room with H5N1, highly pathogenic influenza, and we're not in this room discussing so many of the other gain-of-function research that we do, is because naturally occurring HPAI H5N1 viruses cause a reported almost 60% mortality in humans, which triggered a concern, understandably, clearly, that if you give a gain of function of a pathogenic virus to make it more transmissible, that's a whole different story than some of the other things we faced. So let's get down to what happened very briefly. Historically, and I'm going to go very quickly through the historical perspective that brought us here today. There were studies done by 2 NIAID-funded investigators, Ryan Fouché and Yoshi Kawaoka, in which H5N1, a strain from Indonesia and a strain from Vietnam, were altered in a gain of function, either by direct mutation or by reassortment. And by passage in ferrets, the mammal model for this virus, for humans, there was an increase in fact, a development of aerosol transmissibility in a mammal, which this particular virus did not have.
With the choice of H5N1 for our research, we really tried to hit 2 birds with 1 stone. On one hand, we tried to address the very fundamental question of how influenza viruses become airborne. By using H5N1 as the model virus, we would directly assess the risk of H5N1 becoming airborne. We know particular genetic changes that have occurred during the pandemics of 1918, 57, and 1968. And we used that knowledge to genetically modify H5N1 bird flu virus and try to see if it would also acquire this ability to become airborne. And initially that was not the case. But we then did an experiment of natural selection in the ferret model by serially passaging the mutant virus in ferrets, in the nose of ferrets. And after 10 passages in ferrets, the virus had become airborne, so it could be transmitted by coughing and sneezing and breathing between ferrets. We also characterized the viruses that were transmitted by the aerosol route to identify the mutations that were associated with airborne spread. And that it was actually fairly simple for that virus to acquire that ability. It only took in between 5 and 10 substitutions in a few genes to become airborne. Genetic changes that occurred in the virus were quite similar with previous pandemic viruses. And we further investigated whether this virus would be sensitive to antiviral drugs. By knowing exactly which mutations or which biological traits we have to be on the lookout for during outbreaks, we might be able to eradicate those viruses specifically that are a direct threat to public and animal health. We can better assess the effectiveness of antiviral drugs and vaccines before the viruses actually emerge in the field. Biosafety and biosecurity issues around this manuscript are really minimal. We perform our work in a very safe laboratory. The facility is highly secured also and is under inspection by two governments, the Dutch government and the US government. You need very trained specialist virologists to do this type of work, and so it's unlikely that any lone wolf would repeat this type of work. On top of that, we show in this manuscript that the virus is not particularly lethal once it's transmitted via the aerosol route. In ferret, none of the ferrets die, and it's not particularly efficient in transmission, so it would be unlikely that if this virus would be released from the laboratory, it would actually cause a massive outbreak in humans. The future of this research is really to increase our understanding about the specific mutations that we identified, the biological traits that are associated with those mutations, so that in the future we really can predict which viruses in the field are more likely to become airborne at any given point in time. Increasing our fundamental understanding of the genetic changes that are occurring in viruses once they become airborne. And also research on how generic our findings are to other influenza viruses. But these are really fundamental projects for which much more research work is needed.
Now, why is the ferret aerosol transmissibility of the H5N1 being seen as so dangerous, considering that this virus flus are there in any case all around us? What makes this specific virus so dangerous?
The simple answer to that can be provided from the Fouchier experiment. The Fouchier experiment takes H5N1, which is the bird flu virus. It passages it from one ferret to another and from one ferret to another in a situation where none of these ferrets were aerosol transmitting the virus. But eventually, after I think about 10 passages, the resultant virus that had I think 2 or 3 modifications in its gene sequence was actually aerosol transmissible in the ferret and was virulent, killed the ferrets. Now, you can make the simple leap, which almost everybody who worries about the security aspects of this work is making, which is that prima facie we have a bird flu virus that has an extremely high fatality rate, as high as 40%, that is now aerosol transmissible and therefore can spread in human populations and can cause pandemics.
When we're going to infect ferrets with our known sample of influenza virus, we dilute the virus down so that we're only putting a small number of infectious particles into the animal, because that's really what would happen to an animal or a person naturally acquiring the virus. And then we lightly anaesthetize the ferret and just place a small droplet of a solution containing the virus into their nose. They sort of breathe that in quite naturally while they're lightly under anaesthetic. and that virus in the liquid has access to the cells of the upper respiratory tract, which are the target cells that the virus is going to infect and initiate the infection with. If we use
Is there any way someone could weaponize the bird flu? Is that what we're looking at?
Someone doesn't have to weaponize the bird flu. The birds are doing that.
In Indonesia, thousands of sparrows fell from the sky for an inexplicable reason. A mass death of birds occurred in Bali immediately after the rain. A representative of the Center for the Protection of Natural Resources in Bali said that such a case occurred in the region for the first time. Local authorities are trying to give at least some explanation for this shocking incident. Experts express different opinions. The head of the veterinary department of the Bali administration suggests that the birds may have fallen due to extreme weather. According to another version, the mass death of birds occurred due to acid rain.
Lah mati ke desa lah di semua lah mati ke desa oh plek-plek ke desa plek-plek ya hujan.
Can you believe that? So this is a flock of yellow-headed blackbirds crashing to the ground by the hundreds on a random street in Mexico last week in Chihuahua. So you can see several of them just literally, dozens of the birds are left dead. Many of them come right back up, are able to fly away, but it's believed they may have died as a result of toxic fumes from a nearby heater or even something having to do with power lines nearby. It's still, frankly, a big old mystery. No cause of death has been determined yet, but the video is just so stunning because, as we say every day on this show, it seems like we've got something you've never seen or heard before.
All right. I mean, actually, there was a bird flu scare a few years ago, wasn't there? I think I seem to remember that was big. Gosh, remember when bird flu was big? Anyway, but we're not there again now. Are we? There's nothing. He's like you said there. The risk would be relatively mild. It sounds a stupid question. Does it just give you a cold?
No, H5N1, if it does infect you, is actually quite severe. So the mortality rates are up to 50%. So it's not a virus that we want to mutate to be able to spread in humans. But of course, that risk is always there. And of course, as long as there's H5N1 going through poultry and wild bird populations, you've always got that potential, however unlikely it might be, for some chance mutation to occur that allows it to then spread more effectively from human to human. So,
health officials on Long Island say they have detected bird flu in Suffolk County. It was found among a small backyard flock. The 8 birds have been isolated and the property quarantined. Health officials did not give the location or the breed of the bird. The CDC says this does not present an immediate public health concern.
And deadly form of bird flu was found in dozens of wild birds in our state.
Scientists say it's likely the same strain that forced the killing of 29,000 turkeys on an Indiana farm today. CBS 17's Maggie Newland is digging deeper into avian influenza.
At the Urban Chicken in Raleigh, the hens and chicks are inside, away from exposure to wild birds. But scientists are warning people who keep their birds outdoors to take extra precautions.
Move them inside or keep them sequestered away from other wildlife.
After the North Carolina Department of Agriculture reports 65 cases of bird flu in wild waterfowl.
I don't know we've seen this many in North Carolina ever before.
Dr. Matt Kosey, a professor of viral immunology at NC State, says the illness is very dangerous for chickens and turkeys.
It can kill, depending on the strain, from 60 to 100% of the flock. So it's really deadly.
Do we know if it can spread to people in any way?
The short, honest answer right now is we don't know. Those strains still tend to be fairly rare. There's no reason to believe that this is one of those strains. In the rare cases where it has jumped from birds to people, it doesn't spread from person to person.
U.S. top disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci wants to prepare vaccines for the next potential pandemic. The New York Times reported Sunday that Fauci suggested a project to produce prototype vaccines to protect against 20 families of viruses. If funded, the plan would cost several $billions and take 5 years for the first results to be seen. Fauci added the government program would be undertaken in collaboration with pharmaceutical companies in order to develop vaccines quickly.
You're very specific in your work and the letter about what should come next. You talk about a global alert system infectious disease first responders, and germ games. Walk us through what some of that looks like and whether you think international organizations and the Biden administration can do more on that now.
Well, the great thing is that the tens of billions required for all that preparedness, it's the insurance policy that avoids you losing tens of trillions like we are globally right now. And so it's quite a bargain, even if you only look at what it can do to help during a pandemic. But those investments can also help us improve health on a much broader basis. So the mRNA vaccine can be used for TB and HIV. We're very excited about that, and we've been funding mRNA for over 10 years, and now it's accelerated its development. And getting those early warning systems in, that'll improve health all over the world. So this time, I think people will pay attention.